than a century and a half ago, Thomas Jefferson designed this beautiful classic building, the capital of the Commonwealth of Virginia. It was built on the plan of one of the most famous classical structures in Europe, the Maison Carrée at Nîmes. Today it stands in the center of historic Richmond, the great metropolis at the gateway of the South. In this capital of the old Confederacy are teeming business sections. Beautiful, broad residential avenues. And modern buildings reach for the sky on streets where once was heard the measured tread of Lee's marching legions. Today, magnificent department stores rival Fifth Avenue, a growing, living city proud of the parade of American history passing through its time-honored precincts. The history of every great city is told in and by its newspapers. In Richmond, the two daily newspapers have long and honorable records of active public service, dating in the case of one from before the war between the states, and in the other from late Reconstruction days in Virginia. This modern plant houses the Richmond Times Dispatch and the Richmond News Leader, morning and afternoon dailies, which bring you the latest news 24 hours a day. A great newspaper is a giant, delicate mechanism, the product of many minds and many hearts. All are under the direction of the publisher and president, John Stuart Bryan, a distinguished newspaper man who has devoted his life to studying the needs as well as the trends of his community and state. But it is the editor who gives the news interpretation, and it is the editor who sets forth the paper's position on any controversial subject. Dr. Douglas Southall Freeman, educator, historian, and editor of the Richmond News Leader, works on an editorial which soon will be transmitted to the printer for publication in the same day's issue of the News Leader. In the morning field, Virginius Dabney, editor of the Times Dispatch, brings to his job a background of active reporting experience. He has published numerous articles and books on sociology and economics of the South. These men express the opinions of these two newspapers. The Daily Dispatch, parent of the Times Dispatch, was giving Richmonders the news during the gold rush of '49, and when Fitzhugh Lee, nephew of General Robert E. Lee, became governor of Virginia, the Dispatch carried this front-page likeness. The parent paper of the News Leader was the Manchester Leader. This paper was acquired in 1896 as an afternoon contemporary of the Richmond Times. The Richmond News was started in 1899, and in January 1903, the News and the Leader were combined to form the News Leader. The Dispatch and the Times were merged into the Times Dispatch. These two papers outlived several other daily publications, and on September 1st, 1940, consolidated for publication. Today, we live in a world of news. Modern inventions speed the news while it is still news. The typewriter, the telephone, the telegraph, the radio, the high-speed presses, with all their magic, all play their part in the instant transmission of news from every part of the globe. In the modern world, the tempo of living has been stepped up, and newspapers have stepped up to their service in giving news to the public. Convoys roaring through the night, an automobile accident. A fire which calls out the whole firefighting equipment of a city. A plane crash. All these are the difficult but routine assignments of reporters and photographers. The life of a reporter is not all high excitement on the scene of disaster. His function as a servant of the community is to write the news fairly and truthfully. He interviews the great men of his day, men who are responsible for the welfare of our nation. The senior senator from Virginia, Carter Glass, has talked to many reporters in his day. Covering the news of our nation's capital is a big job, but it is made easier by the wholehearted cooperation of such men as Senator Harry Flood Byrd of Virginia. He is always a good source of news in this nerve center of our nation. News cannot be evaluated until it reaches the newspaper office, and it's up to the managing editor to decide how and where a story shall be displayed. The managing editor of the Times Dispatch studies the value of a story which has been called to his attention by the chief of the copy desk. On the Richmond News Leader, the managing editor confers with a telegraph editor, over whose desk news of the world flows in an endless stream. Local news is highly important, and at these daily conferences, the city editor indicates those stories that deserve prominent display. The city editor of the News Leader might be called the general in charge of local news. A city editor is usually a man who has devoted many years to studying the growth and problems of his community. The city editor has at his fingertips an intimate knowledge of all civic developments. The Times Dispatch city editor has been a Virginia newspaperman for many years in various responsible positions. Over his desk comes all the local news which you read in your morning Times Dispatch. On the scene, a reporter may not have time to write his own story. In such cases, a rewrite man in the office takes it over the telephone. Women reporters play a large part in the production of every great newspaper. This young man is a veteran of the political scene in Virginia. Such specialists comment upon and forecast political results. A large part of every newspaper audience is devoted to following sports. The Richmond News Leader has a staff of 3 men, all well qualified and devoted to their profession. The sports editor directs the activities of this department. And at the football game, the reporter is always behind the scenes. When the umpire cries, "Batter up," the boys in the bleachers may not know that the press department is working, but the sports writers are there. They're not in the front row, but they are working hard to give you a first-hand running account of the game. Through the dense fog of cigarette smoke at the ringside, the reporters ply their trade, writing hastily, but with the accuracy born of experience to tell the story blow by blow. The sports department of the Times Dispatch, like every other department of each newspaper, is an independent unit within the organization. One of the most strenuous of all sports is tennis. It is not to be compared in popularity with baseball or football, but it is a sport in which those who take part must train to a high degree of excellence. The same thing is true of the men of the sports department who report these events. It is a requirement that sports writers know sports from every angle. One horse can always run faster than another, but it isn't safe to predict it, and many a sports writer has undoubtedly been sorry he tried. But the sport of kings holds an endless fascination. The big ones that got away were a bit luckier than this one, but maybe he was luckier than the sports editor, who soon must listen to how it happened. Sometimes sports heroes such as Gene Tierney stay in the headlines. The women's department of the Times Dispatch is composed of several capable and expert young ladies who devote their daily newspaper stint to the writing of stories that interest women readers. So too it is with the News Leader: society news, news of marriages, news of accomplishments, and most valuable to the housewife, advice on how to run a household. The woman's editor of the News Leader writes a daily column which not only has won her wide fame, but also syndication of her column in other papers. She is widely known as a world traveler and commentator, an expert in many languages. This young woman has the task of covering plays and movies for the News Leader, while another capable writer serves in the same capacity for the Times Dispatch. Both have won wide praise for authentic articles about a subject they know well: Hollywood and its people. The central clearinghouse of every newspaper is the copy desk. Over this desk comes a wide variety of views that includes happenings both at home and abroad. Experts write the headlines. War has specialized the work of these men, and a special war desk functioning as a copy desk now speeds late news towards the press. The vast facilities of the Associated Press are on the job day and night for the Richmond newspapers. Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox talks to newsmen in the capital of the United States, talking of the war in the Far East. The teletype machines of the Associated Press carry the news to the waiting newspapers of the country. On the receiving end, the story is torn off in small takes and then assorted on hooks. The Associated Press Bureau, located in the office of the Richmond newspapers, is under the direction of a state bureau chief who supervises all copy. He has final say on any news story that goes out over the wires from his office. Copy is then placed in a tube connecting with the news departments of the Richmond newspapers. This typical AP story is one of the hundreds of items to ride the thunderbolt of the teletype in a single day. When the story has been read, edited, and published, it is identified for readers everywhere by the familiar initials of the world's greatest news-gathering organization. In the background of every story stands the reference department of the newspaper, often called the morgue. Here are filed important names, pictures, dates, and other reference data which are needed by the busy reporters to round out the background of many stories. The Richmond newspapers also maintain an information bureau for the service of the public. Here, highly trained workers quickly find the answers to any questions which a reader might ask.